Welcome back to the MMA Creators Podcast, episode number 97. Now, it's very good timing because UFC 314 is just around the corner. And just before we punch record, we were debating whether we were going to break the card down for now or for later in our in-studio episode later this week. And we thought now is the most appropriate time. And I, for one, in a time where MMA probably is lacking in star power and raw excitement with the UFC pay-per-views as of late, 314 is a nice, refreshing change of pace because Alexander Volkanovski is taking on one Diego Lopes in the main event. And we got a whole host of bangers on the co-main and everything down below. Give me your initial takes, initial thoughts, and everything in between.
I think it's got to be about a 9.2 out of 10, the main card, the main event. I think when you look at a fight card, everything that you want is pretty much on that main card of UFC 314. You want fun narratives, fun matchups, stylistically good matchups, legends versus new generations, passing of the torch moments, comeback stories. It really has everything, apart from Carlos Prates versus Jeff Neal, which would have been the cherry on the top that we just missed. But aside from that, honestly, love it. And I'm actually looking forward to a card for the first time in what feels like a long time.
It does feel like that, right? Because I'm fairly... I mean, I don't even know. Knowing our track records, I'm going to ask you, did you stay up for Lerone Murphy versus Josh Emmett and that whole card?
Tried to. I had a retreat weekend this weekend, to be perfectly honest.
I was going to ask you about this.
Yeah, I've had this booked in for... Honestly, I think this could be the longest I've had a plan in the diary as an adult ever. I had this booked in with my friend around December time for this one weekend to go down to Bournemouth, see my friend's new house. Obviously, we used to go to university there, so we lived there for a few years as well. But I said, I'm going to do the pop-up, do Toe Wrestling London, which took 4 months to essentially build up to. And then the weekend following, so the weekend just gone, I went down to Bournemouth. So I relaxed, but also had a pretty intense time because we got up early. We hit a big game of tennis in the morning. Then we hit the gym. Then we went sauna, steam in rotation. Then came back straight to the beach, bit of bat and ball, some darts, chucked a few arrows. Then a full day.
You still didn't hit that 180 yet?
I have not hit a 180 in 24 hours. No, not yet. It's a work in progress, let's just say that. And then by the time that the UFC came on at 11, there was little to nothing to even pique my interest. It was very difficult. So to stay out for the last event was very tricky, but I woke up, it was the 5th round. I watched the end of it, I watched a little bit of the highlights and then went over a couple of the fights, but my goodness, that was a lackluster fight night. Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, I'm never going to sugarcoat things with the UFC. I think we're at that point as MMA fans where we aren't as much obsessed with each event week in, week out as we used to be. And it's okay to sort of critique things if we don't think they're up to par. And that's generally been the sentiment of a lot of MMA fans recently, I'd say, is the subpar quality of cards. Regardless of the Apex Center debate, that's a whole nother can of worms, if you will. But I think Saturday was probably a good reflection of people's general sentiment. A lot of lackluster fights, maybe some poor matchmaking here and there. But as I said, looking forward to UFC 314. Hopefully, at least on paper, it's a nice, refreshing change of pace. So many good fights. And you can tell it's a great card when there's then probably the ones which are lesser name value, but you know the matchmaking is great and there's going to be a great fight out of it. And there's some good examples of there. Darren Elkins, Julian Erosa, I think is a sleeper one on that card. Two guys are always going to bring it. But I think if you're asking me for my people's main event, it's the one with the big question mark over it. And that is the finally, the anticipated UFC debut of one Patricio Pitbull. You're shaking your head as if to say no. I think that's a great matchup. Him with Yair Rodriguez opens up a lot of possibilities for me. And I always like to see how these guys who transfer over from PFL, Bellator, etc., who have big established skill sets and names within those divisions, or within those companies rather, now making their way to the UFC and see if it translates over. So I'm excited for that one, purely on a sort of intrigue side of things. But equally, from a matchup perspective, stylistically, Yair Rodriguez is a man who is going to make any fight exciting. So I'm absolutely there for that one, as well as course, Bryce Mitchell versus John Silver, which is probably rivaling it as my most anticipated one of the night.
People's main event, I'd probably go with Paddy and Michael Chandler, to be perfectly honest, if we're thinking magnitude of fight. And then slightly more for the die-hard, hardcore fan base, they're looking at Yair Rodriguez versus Pitbull. I will say, I think that is a very tricky assignment on your debut towards the back end of your career. He has lost recently. Yes, he's coming off a good win to Kennedy, but he has lost fairly recently. Like I said, he hasn't got many fights left. He's coming into a new show, big bright lights on a very big card with some very big names, and then boom, you've got Yair Rodriguez snap kicking you in the chops. You've got high kicks, question mark kicks, kicks from weird angles, look low, go high, and it's just a really, really tricky matchup. So I am looking forward to that one. I can see a world in where he gets stopped in the second round, quite possibly. But I can see a world in where he sort of big brothers him a little bit and there's a few stagnant exchanges and we kind of see him scrape a 2-1 decision. But what really jumps off the paper for you, aside from the ones that you just mentioned?
Well, I'm going to go with the one that you said, the co-main event. I mean, Chandler, Paddy Pimblett, I have been very vocal about this matchup on my stream for quite a while now, ever since it got announced. That a lot of people, in fact, weirdly, overwhelmingly, in favor of Michael Chandler for this matchup, as if he was just going to walk through Paddy. But the thing I've always started to say about him is you can like him or you can really despise him. I think the reality is a lot of people don't want to admit that he's come on leaps and bounds since his UFC debut, and he's actually pretty good. You know, there's still a question mark on whether he's championship caliber, but he's not far off it. And I don't think it's a too tall order for him at all to beat Michael Chandler. I think he's going to submit him. I think his jiu-jitsu is going to be the deciding factor in this matchup. And I can see honestly, like a round 2, round 3 rear naked choke. I think that's going to be a vulnerability for Chandler. I know he's had success in the past with his submission defense against Charles Oliveira, but let's not forget Dustin Poirier was a man who submitted him too. So there isn't really a definitive answer to Paddy Pimblett's jiu-jitsu, if you're asking me. And as I said, it just goes back to, I think, the general sentiment towards Paddy. Some of the wrong decisions he's made, probably outside of the cage, on the microphone, that have led him to almost play a heel role in recent memory. And that's brought on a lot of negative fan sentiment. I think this is going to be a real reality check moment for a lot of MMA fans. I think they're finally going to realize that this guy, he could actually do it. He could win a UFC title. And if he beats Michael Chandler, and with the star power he has, and the flair he has with that finish, if it comes, who knows? Might be able to skip the line. We've seen it happen before. So realistically, the reality is, if he beats Chandler here, he's 1 or 2 fights away from a title shot.
The thing that I was talking to his manager about, funnily enough, is it being 5 rounds, which is a little bit rogue because you don't always get co-main events that are 5 rounds. Not always the case on pay-per-views either. You sometimes get it for matchups which are big enough. And that sort of goes to show what the UFC think of these two guys, right? They know that they are worthy of a spot like this. I honestly don't know who that favors. I'm really not too sure. I think it favors Paddy. I just think with less miles on the clock, probably slightly better conditioning over 5 rounds because he doesn't load up quite as much on his output. He's also a lot more efficient with grappling exchanges where he may capitalize on a small opportunity and then take the bag. Michael Chandler's pistol squatting you from a single leg position just over your head, which is super impressive, and very small percentile of people can do that, but a lot more energy reserves are going to be needed for that. And one thing that I can't help but look past with anyone in this conversation, not the fact is Michael Chandler, but it's the age. Coming towards 38 years of age in the lightweight division, I know it's a very played out narrative, but there's only so many times you can rely on athleticism and good, tough conditioning to weather the storm and then beat people. And yes, Michael Chandler can give up mistakes, and so can Paddy. but I think Paddy's just going to be a little bit too resilient over 25 minutes, and I do think he stops him probably in the third or fourth round via submission.
I will actually say, adding on to that, Chandler is 39 this month. He's 39.
There you go. Wow.
Yeah, he's 39 in about 3 weeks' time. And that just speaks even more to what you say. I mean, that's always a factor I bring up a lot, not just on here, but on the streams, even in my videos as well, is that age is just such a barrier. It doesn't matter what you can do, as you say, how strong or how great your conditioning is, your general athleticism, your abilities just will fade with age. It happens to everybody. Time is forever undefeated, and I'm of the opinion that it will claim Michael Chandler when he takes on Paddy Pimblett next week. Another one that sticks out, I mean, outside of the main event, Jim Miller, Chase Hooper. That's a little one. As you said earlier, when you were introducing the card, passing the torch style of fights, old versus young generation. Name a better example than that. I mean, Chase Hooper is a guy that's come on leaps and bounds, and I actually think he's done a really good job of tapping into the social media side of things. I know a lot of fighters do that. We do speak on them. Some are also very bad at it. Chase Hooper definitely doesn't fall into that camp. Very active on Instagram and very personable. I think that's a sort of human element that he has that probably a lot of fighters definitely miss. So I'll definitely be rooting for him in that one, as much as I'm a fan of Jim Miller. And of course, as we were just speaking about age with Michael Chandler, the same factor is going to be a problem for Jim Miller, inevitably. And he has done well to stave off the clock, but I'm going to have to go with youth over experience once again.
Yeah, one of the most impressive things about him, he's never had a major surgery, Jim Miller. Jim Miller has never had a major surgery in his entire UFC career. And I think that is honestly one of the most impressive statistics going around, because to have that many fights at that level, at that weight class, I must add, one of the best, if not the best consistently in the UFC's history. It's super, super impressive. Just going back quickly to the Paddy and Michael Chandler fight, just paths to victory really quickly. I think the biggest problem Paddy is going to have is early, when Michael Chandler does rush forward, he does throw hooks from both stances. He looks to get you against the cage and then put big attacks on the exit. So something like Dan Hooker. Paddy's got to be careful about moving backwards, potentially with his chin in the air, and then walking on to a left hook or a right hook out of one of the exit sides along the fence. And equally, Michael Chandler has to be worried about the same thing, because Paddy's always got a very underrated lead leg game. His teeps are very nice. His switch kicks are very nice. His lead high kicks very nice. Very quick and very sneaky. And what he does very well is when he does land, he gets the momentum going downhill very fast. He'll come at you with jumping switch knees and big hooks, and a little bit like Charles Oliveira, funnily enough, which we've obviously seen with Michael Chandler. And I think he's got to be careful going against the cage Chandler, because either Paddy does have the power to put him down, or he has the power to at least get him making a bad decision and then wrapping up a neck, whether it be a jumping triangle, whether it be a guillotine. He's legitimately got a lot of attack. So, yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to that fight. But sorry, you were saying originally.
No, I think, I mean, complete agreement. There's a lot of weird factors and analogies you can take with that fight in terms of styles. I definitely see the resemblance to Charles Oliveira in the sense that the swing of momentum when Paddy gets a striking exchange going and he lands like an early kick, he'll start running towards you. He'll start taking that front foot and just pressing. And that could work to his detriment against a certain style of fighter. Chandler, I don't think, is one of them. So I think that's definitely going to be some success there. But of course, we did briefly mention Bryce Mitchell, John Silva, which is probably one of the most talked about fights if we're talking about narratives. I'm sure 99% of the population is probably rooting for the Brazilian, not just because of his star power and his excitement that he brings in the cage, but because of the various choice words Bryce Mitchell has chosen in recent memory, which obviously we don't need to delve into. Very little needs to be said there. But I think the cold, sort of sobering reality with a fight like that is Bryce Mitchell can very, very feasibly win this. It almost feels like people are writing him off because John Silva's been on such a finishing tear. But let's not get it twisted. Bryce Mitchell has some of the best jiu-jitsu in the game. He's not a stupid man. I mean, he might say stupid things, but, you know, he's very good at jiu-jitsu, you know? And I think that's a big thing people are just choosing to forget almost. I mean, let's not forget he's one of the few people in the UFC who has a twister submission to his name, which is pretty incredible just on its own. So I'm excited for it. I think actually matchup wise, it's a stylistic treat. Really, it's a nice test for John Silver, who I don't think, as far as I'm aware, has really been faced with a grappler of this caliber. And of course, it's just a big step up for him too. And when you really want to catapult big stars, to that superpower sort of level, right? That extra tier above, you have to put them against credible opposition and give them a platform to put on a show and put on a clinic, put on a knockout, a crazy performance, anything like that that's going to get picked up on the socials that can propel you upwards. And this is a perfect platform for John Silver to do that. So color me very excited. And I'm going to pick the Brazilian here. I can feel a finish. Second round knockout.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all, to be honest.
The prediction or the general sentiment towards the fight?
No, just the prediction. I think the thing you highlighted, which is very true, is Bryce Mitchell does have very good jiu-jitsu. That's an obvious narrative. But one thing about Bryce, which needs to be mentioned, he has good enough wrestling to actually allow his jiu-jitsu to come into play, which is not always the case. Sometimes people actually struggle to get their opponent to the ground, whereas Bryce actually does a good job with getting entanglements and then working his jiu-jitsu as well in an MMA realm. And if you go back and watch some of his fights, we've seen a world where on his worst night, I know the fight didn't go his way, but he still pinned Ilia Topuria for 1.5 minutes. And then you go back and have a look at the fight between Charles Jourdain and John Silver. Again, impressive fight from John Silver, but he got taken down a few times by Charles Jourdain at featherweight, who has now gone down to bantamweight as well, which is worth noting.
Good point.
I'm not trying to draw MMA maths necessarily, but we do need to remember that Bryce Mitchell is no mug on the feet. You go back and watch that Edson Barboza fight. He had to strike with him for quite extended periods of time before then using his grappling. It's easy to just remember the Ilia Topuria fight, but I think when you hear about how ill he was going into that, I'm not saying it would have changed the outcome, but it makes the ending and at least the visuals make a little bit more sense because we'd never seen Bryce so tired and so fatigued. And
Bryce had success there too. I think people forget that. Bryce took Topuria down and, didn't keep him there for, the whole round or so, but he had some good success. Yeah, I mean, a minute, and against a guy like Topuria, sizable amount, right? So I definitely agree with you to some extent. As I said, I do think people are writing Bryce off maybe a little bit too much because of the things he said, almost out of a willingness to see him lose or want to see him lose. But I do think John Silver's going to make his mark here. I mean, really level up the fighting nerds a little bit more.
I would not be too surprised because the fighting nerds honestly are putting so much momentum together and they keep having huge performances. Every time you think their growth is going to be stunted, it goes to a different level. So this really is, like you said, the platform for that. So I wouldn't be shocked. But equally, I do think this is quite a big step up for John Silver. I really do. And although I could see a world in where he just looks incredible and then goes to that next level, I think he might hit a wall of reality in Bryce Mitchell, who has a lot to prove. And we haven't seen for a good while now as well. So I'm actually going to go Bryce on this one. I'm going to go decision. He's just going to be able to get too much control and just do enough to win on the scorecards.
I will say the odds are pretty wide. As you say that, I mean, they're more wide than I thought they would be. For both. I mean, John Silver is a minus 340 to win. Bryce is a plus 270.
Ridiculous.
That is crazy, right? I don't think the odds are that wide. I do think John Silver's going to win.
What has happened to give you those odds? What has happened?
Yeah, I agree. I think the general matchups we've seen from both men of their sides of the careers is not reflective of those odds. I do agree. So maybe there is money to be made there. Maybe I might have to put a little punt on Bryce by decision to see how it goes. You're right. But looking at some closer odds, which I think are definitely more fairly predicted, is Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes, of course, who we mentioned earlier, the main event of UFC 314. Volkanovski a slight favorite. And I think that's fair because, again, I'm going to bring it back to what we said, age being a huge factor. Really seems to be a common theme running throughout this whole card. But it's obviously a narrative of Volkanovski. He's actually spoken about it in some recent interviews in Fight Week. It's part of his narrative, beating and besting a young and hungry guy who's got, age on his side. It all adds to his story and his legend. And that's definitely a fair argument should Volkanovski get his hand raised at the end of the night. But it's a tall order. It is a tough one. The reality of Diego Lopes is he is one of the most dangerous strikers in the division. But I have to add an asterisk there. In my opinion, only in the first couple rounds. After that, we see less pop on his shots. We see him start to fade, and we see him start to gas out a little bit. And that is where the fight is won for Volkanovski for me. He has to weather that storm, those early flurries. And I think the real question mark is that big weakness Volkanovski has. Is he when he backs up, he leaves his chin out. He leaves his chin open in the air, like he just did against Topuria. I worry a lot that he's going to do the same thing against Lopes, and he's going to get caught. I really hope that doesn't happen. We both have huge love for Volkanovski. He's one of my favorite fighters, and I know he's one of yours. Hopefully, he can run back the clock here. I am going to pick him by decision, but I don't say it with much sense of confidence, knowing what Diego Lopes can do and knowing his finishing pedigree. But I will say, as a silver lining, I'm happy as either man lifting undisputed gold because I'm a fan of both.
Do look at some of the Diego Lopes fights and think a similar thing, where we have seen him slow down towards the end of the fights. I also think it would be fair to say that would only be natural because his output is so high and he fights with such ferocity. And I haven't technically seen a time where he hasn't been able to maintain that tired pace as well, which is important. Dricus du Plessis gets tired, he still has some of, if not the best cardio in MMA at the moment. Right? It's about operating at that tired state as well. I know all of those things have been proven from Volk, so there's probabilities are all 100% on that. I know I'm going to get that. I also know that he can get clipped. He can when you watch his fights, and that is what worries me, specifically in the clinch. That's what worries me. That's where Diego Lopes is very, very good in the clinch, where some people like to go for control and they'll go maybe a tie clinch with two hands, or maybe just a single tie clinch with one hand, and that's what Diego Lopes will do. But he prioritizes damage. He'll just let his hands go at full speed and just rip 6-7 punches. We saw it against almost everyone he's fought, really, and then most recently against Brian Ortega. So they're the exchanges that worry me, just in the clinch with Volkanovski. If it's from the outside, if it's from range, I don't think Lopes is going to have much for him, to be honest. I don't think he's going to have much for the way that Volk mixes up his targets with his punches, his kicks, the way that he goes between both stances, his range control. I don't think he's going to have any problems there whatsoever. I think he's going to be on a different operating system. But when it gets in the clinch, that's what's going to worry me a little bit. But I'm swaying towards you. I can see this going either way, and I can see youth prevail. But I know what Volk is. I know what Volk is capable of. I know what he's capable of. Just if I'm betting a probability, I know that I've seen Volk do what I think he's going to do more times than I've seen Diego Lopes do what I think could happen as well, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go Volk by decision.
Yeah, I am with you, but I think, just to round off before we delve into some creator topics, I think something we do need to mention, and neither of us have until this point, is that Diego Lopes' grappling is opportunistic, and that is so dangerous against a man like Volkanovski. I've said this many times before. Guys like Lopes and guys like Brian Ortega, who of course very nearly finished Volkanovski, have that equalizer. They have that opportunistic grappling where they might not be cerebral wrestlers like a guy like Islam Makhachev or Khabib, where they'll grind you and systematically break you down, but they can snatch on a neck, snatch on an arm, and end the fight like that. It's the same way you have Ngannou with his punch power. You have Lopes and Ortega with these submission opportunities, which they will find and they will look for. And that's definitely a route to victory for him. And of course, with Volkanovski's track record, getting caught in that submission, it did happen, and it could happen again. And he is older. He is slightly less sharp. That's a reality we have to face now. He's not as good as he used to be. So there is, I'm sure there will be, come that fight, opportunities for Lopes to snatch that neck, grab a guillotine, maybe even lock up a triangle, as he did early on in his UFC career. So that there's always a route there for Lopes, and that's another path that I wouldn't say Volkanovski has.
True. I think his equalizer with that is his ground and pound. I think Volk's ground and pound is underrated, but actually probably some of the best in MMA. And again, he can sustain that pace. So when he's framing in someone's guard and he's just landing shots and elbows and heavy punches, he can maintain that pace. So if it is just a case of Volk's on top and Diego Lopes is going jiu-jitsu and they're both fresh and they're both unhurt, I think Volk is going to be able to just bully his way through any sort of guard, any sort of attacks, and just punch his way through it. But equally, like you said, Diego Lopes is dangerous, and I think he'll be more dangerous if he hurts Volk and then he's going for submissions. I don't know if he'll get him clean and dry and unhurt and then wrap up a sub. That'll be very, very tricky. But can he rock him and then put him in a spot? Most certainly. So, yeah, it will be interesting one to see that unfold, because I would love to wake up Sunday morning with Volkanovski as a champion again, just to feel whole longer, again. Right? Yeah, just to feel happy again, you know, just to feel
I don't think my life's
right in the world. And I'll tell you what would be all right in the world is if Dominic Reyes came back from a 4-fight losing streak and got a 3-fight KO streak over Dustin Jacoby, Anthony Smith, and now potentially Nikita Krylov, who again is someone quite underappreciated at 205. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with the sentiment and the potential result. I think Krylov is definitely a tougher test, a bigger step up. But I think when you talk about that streak he's on, that 2-fight winning streak, knocking out Dustin Jacoby is a tough one. That's a guy with big kickboxing pedigree and experience. I believe he fought Alex Pereira back in the day, though. I could be wrong.
He did.
And obviously Anthony Smith, maybe less weighted, but still an impressive. You know, he's a guy who's durable.
Paper.
On paper, of course, the pound for pound king. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's the matter of being a feel-good story. I've always been a big Dominic Reyes fan ever since that John Jones fight. I forever will be of that opinion that he won at UFC 247 that night and deserved to be the undisputed light heavyweight champion and the only man to beat John Jones. Unfortunately, the MMA gods didn't see it that way, but now it's an opportunity to get that one step closer towards the sports summit. And I definitely think he can do it. I think he's a better striker than Krylov, who is quite good everywhere. He's just a decent all-rounder. But, you know, we've seen him fade a few times, and we've seen him have those lapses of fight IQ and concentration. I think probably most infamously was the card you and me were both at in the UFC London when Paul Craig snatched that triangle on him in a fight that he was, you know, Krylov was winning pretty firmly, very close to finishing that fight. But there was that lapse of concentration, lack of respect for a guy with great jiu-jitsu, and that's what made him pay the price. So I feel like we could see something similar, but on the feet against a man like Dominic Reyes. But I'm excited for it. It's a good one on that card as well.
It was a pretty good place to round off UFC 314. Like you said, we've got quite a lot of juicy matchups. It's one card for a flipping long time I've actually looked forward to. Even the last couple of pay-per-views have been a little bit lighter down the card, but this is one that I'm actually going to be excited to watch the matchups. So that feels nice equally, because it feels like it's been a minute for that. But
it has, isn't it?
With all that being said, what's been going on in the world of Leo Cooper MMA recently?
I actually did want to pick your brain, because I've been kind of struggling with my workflow and just a lot of pondering around the video I'm currently working on. And I say that because I'm currently working on a Jiri Prochazka documentary, and I loved writing it. Took me a while to really get to grips with what I wanted to do. And then as soon as I started planning out the script, I was like, okay, this is really fun. Delving into the philosophies and the mentalities of a specific fighter, especially one as intriguing as Jiri Prochazka, is like an absolute treat. Like his warrior mentality and how he sculpted that is so cool to write about and to just look into. But the big question mark for me in terms of the actual video that I'm kind of struggling with is when to release it. I originally planned to do it this Saturday if I can get it done by then, but I've started to realize that I don't know if that's the right option. I feel like with a video of its quality, which I know will be good, be great even, eventually it will find its audience. But I've started to realize that maybe timing is not on my side. But I kind of want to get to a point with the video packaging and framing that's irrelevant. I want it to just appeal to people regardless of whoever's fighting on Saturday or whoever's not, right? So I just wanted to get your 2 cents on that, how that's translated to you for short form in terms of timing of releasing videos and topics on certain fighters, people, events. Give me your 2 thoughts or 2 cents.
I think both is true, right? So in an ideal world, what it would look like is Jiri Prochazka has a fight coming up, and you release it at a nice time where there is traffic to that particular search term and there's going to be people's interest peaked. Equally, it's like what you said, you want to get to a point where the content alone is good enough to be well received at any point of the year. Now, would it be ideal if you had a fight coming around the corner? Sure. But what's the alternative? The alternative is you can sit on the video and wait until you feel like it's more applicable, or you can just let it move on to the next one.
Well, what do you suggest? Because honestly, I'm so torn between both options. I was thinking about just pausing work on it and just starting something else, or even just finishing it and then having it on the side ready to post. I don't know. I want whatever's gonna make the video do the best, perform the best. That's what I want.
The truth of it is, I will say this. The truth of it is, if you turn around and that video is the best version you can possibly make of it, it shouldn't really, the metrics they shouldn't really be affected that much by the fact it's Yuri Brashka fight week or not. If it's good enough to create an audience, it will. And when Yuri eventually fights next, it's just going to be pumped into people's feeds. He's not going to fight before you release it again. So then it will be currently up to date anyway. So it's going to be tremendously relevant. So I would just let it go. That's my own personal opinion. And I just move on to the next thing. I have this sort of mindset that I adapted probably about 8 months ago. I just said to myself, never leave anything on the table. If I can create it and if I can post it, just post it. If I'm trying to wait for a perfect moment or a perfect time, there's relevant times to do that. I've got some footage today that I edited of Paddy that I've never released. It was relevant to do that today. I haven't done that before. But equally, sometimes it's just good to let it rip. And I think, why not?
Yeah, why not? It's a tricky one. It's actually been an interesting foray because, as I said, fight documentaries are probably the style of video I feel like most at home with. The style of video I probably enjoy making the most, and it's probably the one I'm best at too. But like, I feel like I've said before, when I'm doing these fight documentaries, you really get an idea of the kind of person they are because you have to do a lot of research. You delve into their story, their career, and their psyche too. And I feel like with Jury, it's been like that, like twofold, threefold even, because he's such an eccentric character, but behind that sort of gladiator mentality is a real interesting individual. And that's been such a sort of pleasure to research and go into. But equally, it's been made it really difficult to write about as well because he's just so different from everyone else. He's such an anomaly in every facet. So trying to put that from thoughts to words to writing on a page, it's been a tricky one. But I'm very much excited to put it out, as you said. It's just a matter of timing and when to do so. I
really need to go for a wee, so it may be a little bit of a shorter episode this week, and we just wrap it up. So I can run off.
Yeah, sure. To be honest, I don't have too much to jump in, but how shall I flow this? Should we just keep that on car?
Yeah, just leave it.
Yeah. Yeah, go on. This has been the MMA Creators Podcast, episode number 97, with a little bit of a shorter one for you guys. And we will see you in studio this week. Keep it casual. I just said keep it casual. There you go. That was instinctual.